So in Module 8, we're going to just further go on into depressive and bipolar disorder, talking about the incidence and prevalence of depression, and then an intriguing kind of take on how it developed or why it's here. So let's go ahead and look at the lifetime risk of the based on the National Comorbidity Survey replication. And so this was a national survey that was looking at mental health issues and trying to figure out what the lifetime prevalence was for the various disorders. In this case, the mood disorders that we've been discussing in this chapter. And what you can see here is the lifetime risk of someone developing major depressive disorder is at 16%. Now, that just means that you have an episode like that some point in your life, but it's also one of the most common forms of psychopathology, which of course we've been discussing throughout this chapter. And that roughly translates to, I want to say like 1 in 7 people. So it's more than likely that somebody in your life is going to experience major depressive disorder, if not you yourself, because most of us know more than 7 people. Now, dysthymia, or as we've referred to it as persistent depressive disorder, we see about a 3% lifetime prevalence. So much, much less odds that you're going to have the dysthymia. And just anecdotally, when I'm doing diagnosis in my own private practice, I know I've diagnosed major depressive disorder far more frequently than dysthymia. And then finally, bipolar 1 and 2 combined is about 4%. So once again, a pretty low likelihood that people will have either the persistent depressive disorder or bipolar 1 and 2. So the ratio of somebody developing a major depressive disorder or a unipolar kind of depression versus bipolar is about 5 to 1. So for every 5 people that are unipolar, you'll have 1 that develops bipolar. So once again, just to reiterate kind of the difference there. Now, one of the problems that we see with such a high rate of individuals that are having to deal with this disorder is, do we get treatment? Are they able to find it? And the answer pretty much is no. You can see here that 20% of those with mood disorder received adequate treatment during that past year, those who have a mood disorder. So disturbingly, that means 80% do not. And as you can imagine, there is a huge impact on lost productivity to our economy, not to mention all the lives that are wrecked that individuals with major depressive disorder are going through. And it's been proven that if we do get treatment, that you are able to kind of get back on your feet and get moving forward and be better functioning quicker than if you just kind of let things take its course. So as far as gender differences between the various disorders, women are about 2 to 3 times more likely to experience depression than men. When we see this pattern in what we call internalizing disorders, that's going to also encompass things like anxiety. And women just tend to be more likely to develop both anxiety and depression. One of the things that we see is the difference is not due to women more likely to seek treatment than men, but the role that they play in society. Our society certainly encourages women to typically be more introspective and also really depend upon relationships and to analyze those relationships more so than men. So as a correspondent, we see more internalizing disorders. And of course, the flip side is true where we see more outward behavioral kind of disorders in men. So it's not just that women are more susceptible, it's just this type they tend to show more often, whereas men tend to show more externalizing. So, think about what other factors could explain the difference in addition to the role that they play in regards to why we see such a much higher rate in these kind of unipolar depressions in women than in men. And it's interesting to note here that the differences between men and women really aren't observed in bipolar 1 disorder. So, it's not the depression and mania seems to be equally distributed, but the depression only seems to be more in women. So something to ponder there. Obviously, there's probably some answers, but go way beyond our class in abnormal. Yeah, I mean, they write whole books on all of these subjects. So if you're interested, there's certainly a way to kind of look up more on that. So the next slide here just kind of provides you a little bit of an overview of an integrative model of mood disorders, looking at, having biological vulnerability. It's another way of talking about genetics. We talked about some of the psychological vulnerability that might be involved, the history, the things that we bring to it. And then typically, there's some stressful life event that kind of sets it off, a tipping point, in addition to these vulnerabilities. And you can see some of the things that can happen, such as an activation of stress hormones with just wide ranging effects on our neurotransmitters, affecting the way that we think, the way that our cognitions run. So, negative attributions, feeling hopeless, very negative schema that's going to bring you down. And then, of course, having problems in your interpersonal relationships or not having social support. And all of that kind of goes together to form a mood disorder. And so you may wonder, because mood disorders not only are very prevalent in our society, but they tend to be worldwide. It's not a societal specific type disorder like we talked about in the prior chapters regarding cultural kind of influences on disorders. This is not one of them. Tends to be a universal one. So an intriguing kind of theory as to why it developed is this evolutionary perspective, and that the symptoms of depression, things like slowing down, loss of motivation, withdrawal from other people, it really may represent this kind of response system that helps people disengage from situations that aren't going well. And then you can use that energy, once you get out of depression, of course, to refocus that motivation on something else. So you don't continually lose and waste energy in response to this kind of loss and defeat, but rather reorient yourself and head on in another direction. So when I was, reading through this theory, I was thinking about when you break up with an individual that you're very close to, it is normal to go through this kind of depressive kind of response. And it means you don't want to have anything to do with the other individual. You want to just kind of back away from relationships in general altogether. And if that relationship wasn't working, it's best that you probably do have that reaction so that you're able to reorient yourself and not try to cling on to something that is basically wasting the energy that you have. Uh, so it's one perspective, and like I said, it's intriguing when you think about it, and I certainly interesting sort of thing, but I don't know if it's the response. So anytime, it is interesting to kind of think about, like, why do we develop anxiety? Why do we have, things like that? And the depression one in particular, because it is just so prevalent in a variety of societies, I think really garners that type of thought process. So that's going to wrap up Module 8, talking about, once again, the incidence and prevalence of depression and a possible cause through evolutionary perspective of depression. And in Module 9, we are going to start talking more about the causes of depression, this time focusing on social factors. So stay tuned for Module 9.